One of the best parts of Warhammer 40,000 is the homebrew element of most factions. You can seriously take something like a Space Marine chapter and combine it with just about any theme to create a custom army. Inevitably, the urge to smash together two factions in order to create a new awesome hybrid army overtakes just about every wargamer that has ever played 40k. And that's what we're going to talk about today in another deep dive video into the Warhammer 40k lore, starting off with the Adeptus Mechanicus combined with the Tau Empire in what I like to call Skitarii Fire Warriors. Skitarii Guevesa are the rarest Tau auxiliary force in the entire Tau Empire. Not only does a tech priest of the Adeptus Mechanicus have to betray the Imperium of Man and go against the teachings of the Cult Mechanicus in order to fuse with xenotechnology, but the Tau Empire has to trust the dangerous and erratic machinery of the Skitarii. When both forces synchronize, the result is an almost unstoppable military force that fights with great zeal and the clever military science of the Firecast. The Imperium goes to extreme lengths to destroy these types of traitors, and for the most part, the Cult Mechanicus destroys any evidence of their existence. In the short time since the Tau Empire's expansion, there is but one Skitarii Guevesa force that has managed to evade punishment and is a beacon of innovation and cooperation with the Tau Empire. It's the military force of the Sept world of Shai Mundus. Now let's keep rolling with the Adeptus Mechanicus as we get into Genestealers mixing with Skitarii in a very canon faction known as the Bladed Cog. The Bladed Cog is a Genestealer cult that exemplifies the hybridizations of two deadly factions, the Tyranids and the Adeptus Mechanicus. The story of this cult begins on the planet of Feynminster Gamma, an industrial hub ruled over by the priesthood of Mars. This humble planet provided most of its resources to the different Forge worlds scattered across their system. The planet itself was not as grand as the rest of the domains of the Adeptus Mechanicus, but eventually in the 41st millennium, it caught the attention of the tech priest Dominus Ovid Threncium, also known as the Great Miser. His vision was to use the planet of Feynminster Gamma as a refuge and a launch-off point for his macro-clad armies and their crusade across the sector. In his data slates, the world was marked as a bountiful source of energy and manpower. Yet the planet, despite the tech priest's assumptions, proved to have a remarkably low energy yield. Since the opening of the major warp storm in the neighboring Vakadan system, many of the Feynminster Gamma's meager genitoriums had been running on emergency protocols simply to keep artificial lighting shining bright. Populace reasoned that if the baleful light of the warp storm was eclipsed by the conventional loom globes closer to home, none would stare too long at the celestial phenomenon, and hence countless citizens would be spared the madness and despair. When the tech priest Dominus found the paltry genitorium district struggling even to keep the cities lit around the clock, his hopes of securing a forward base deeper into space was dashed. In consultation with the Fulgurite advisors, he decided to take a rich harvest of bioelectricity from the planet's living population instead, using them as fuel. The technosenses that followed tried to create a catalog of those who had bionic enhancements and those that did not. Instead, it saw tens of thousands of citizens leaving the halls of the Adeptus Mechanicus as a stumbling near comatose husks. This slowly created civil unrest across the planet until it bubbled to the surface as a powerful eruption that could not be denied. Using industrial tools, improvised weaponry, and rudimentary guns purchased on the shadow market, the slave workers of the planet rose up against the agents of the Cult Mechanicus who had sought to bleed them dry. They were hopelessly outmatched, however. Extermination servitor details and Skitarii macroclads were sent to eradicate the worst of the slave revolts, though in his greed for more energy, the tech priest Dominus spared the lives of as many people as he could, and hence let the seeds of a new rebellion grow amidst the ashes of battle. For a while, the Adeptus Mechanicus regained control, but the atmosphere of oppression and paranoia that resulted was fertile ground for a spread of an underground religion. Unfortunately, in the midst of this political turmoil, a pure-tide Genestealer was unwittingly born in the planet's surface by a cargo freighter known as the Red Spark. A widespread cult of deliverance soon followed. The xenoform was seen as proof that there were other cultures and even other intelligent species beyond the clouds that were surely less cruel and tyrannical than the Adeptus Mechanicus. The crew of the Red Spark was adamant that salvation could be found in the worship of this unusual cargo. Slowly at first, but with gathering speed, whispers of a new deliverance movement spread throughout the entire populace. No longer would the cultists be content to be part of the same heartless and unceasing machines as their rulers. Instead, they would become a blade, the code brands and electus with which the planet's tech priest overseers had marked their citizen workers were in many cases altered with illicit ink dens to jibe with the new imagery of the emergent cult. The Omnissiah's sacred cog mechanicus, the icon of the Adeptus Mechanicus, was adapted to better resemble the jag-spine emblem with which the creed marked out its faithful members. Slogan tattoos became common. They were worn across the collarbone or spine, each bearing a message that a believer in the Martian creed would consider shocking and blasphemous in the extreme. Every solar hour, the forged temples of the planets produced a new clutch of battle tanks and servitor pattern transports. These too were taken by the cult and dabbed with this rebellious insignia. The common populace were not the only ones to fall under the spell of the cult of the bladed cog. Though it took the mental onslaught of the Genestealer Patriarch itself to achieve it, many Skitarii were brought into the embrace of the cult. Their electrospore signatures and nospheric auras gained entry into many areas that should have been forbidden, and allowed the cult to spread unchecked. With these cyborg inductees gradually corrupting the brotherhood of their own clades, the seeds of the populace's grim salvation were sown. The day of ascension was triggered only when every parameter run through exhaustive simulations by the former Skitarii Alpha, who acted as the cult's nexus, pointed towards victory. With mathematical precision, the Tech Priest Dominus's regimes were overthrown, liquefied by a biomutative bullet so that the cult's nemesis could know the terrible glory of unbound flesh before he died. Sadly, on that day, the broodkin of the bladed cog, the entire populace of the planet, completely swapped one set of cruel masters for another, though they are yet to learn that their new overlords ultimately answer to a force that is indefinitely worse than that of their former rulers, the Tyranid Hive Fleets. Now, we've been talking about humanity in these combinations, but what happens when a Genestealer cult mixes with another Xenos race? Let's take a look at Orc Genestealers. The reason that an Orc/Tyranid hybrid can exist is because of the Tyranid's initial invasion process. You see, the hive mind creates a bioform known as a Genestealer that gets launched out into the galaxy long before the Tyranid hive fleet arrives in a system. Its job is to prep the world for the Tyranid invasion. This small brood of Genestealers arrives on the planet, and its first instinct is to reproduce, not with other members of the brood, but rather inseminating whatever sentient life form exists on that planet in order for them to create more Genestealers. So the original Genestealers are referred to as pure-type Genestealers, and then those that come after are recognized as hybrids. These hybrids can be broken down into way more categories, but that's a topic for a completely different video. What we want to focus on is the big picture as to why this is happening. You see, Genestealers sent out a signal to the hive mind that calls it to them, but there are multiple broods scattered all across the galaxy for each individual hive fleet. So in order to stand out from the rest of them, the brood needs as many Genestealers as possible so that the signal can be as strong as possible. If this brood can create a large enough population, then the hive mind will be more attracted to their signal because it's a sign that there's a good amount of biomass that is sustaining this large population, in other words, more food for it to consume on this specific planet. Knowing this, it's easy to understand why the native life of a planet is very important to the pure-type Genestealers. They need a base population that is easy to infiltrate with their genes and whose hybrids will prosper amongst the locals. And so far, humanity has been the best host, and the orcs, on the other hand, have been the worst species to infect. Because the greenskins are everywhere in the galaxy, many broods have had the displeasure of realizing that any prospect of furthering the Genestealer species hits a dead end after a couple of orc hybrids. You see, the orc culture is not structured to care for their own kind. They live in a society where any form of mutation or disability will be mercilessly taken advantage of. These first-generation orc hybrids appear more like Genestealers than they do orcs, so once a proper orc lays eyes upon a bulbous-headed orc with 4 arms and scales, the entire mob will slaughter the poor mutated bastard. In order for a Genestealer hybrid to look more like the host population and not get pummeled to death by their tribe, multiple generations have to go by before a Genestealer orc looks like a proper orc, and even then you can kind of tell. And since the orc spores don't get released until the end of their life cycle, the development of these hybrids is a very slow process. These first-generation hybrids will more than likely get run out of the tribe long before they have a chance to release their spores or infect other orcs. We also have to mention that the coding inside of the orc DNA has a biological trigger that reduces the amount of spores produced by an infected orc. This is something probably engineered into them by the old ones in order to prevent hereditary diseases from hurting the orcs, and it now serves to protect them from any type of genetic manipulation of their spores. Now, the only place that an orc hybrid mob has any luck of growing and prospering is amongst feral orcs. Unlike civilized orcs, the feral or the savage orcs don't have the common sense to push away these strange looking orc hybrids, so sometimes, albeit rarely, a gene stealer orc hybrid brood does make it out of the jungle and into an orc encampment, where hopefully they can assert their dominance over the civilized orcs. But what usually ends up happening is that the orc knobs or even a war boss notices that there's something odd with these boys, and eventually they realize that these aren't proper orcs, they've been taken over by the bug eyes and they are quickly slaughtered. All of this goes to show how difficult it is for the gene stealers to infiltrate the orcs. Most of the time, the gene stealer patriarch won't even attempt to use the orcs as a host, they will simply just try to kill them. When orc hybrids have been encountered, it's usually inside of a space hulk, where the gene stealers had no choice but to use these greenskins who got too curious about a spaceship that was drifting for centuries in space. The truly smart gene stealer patriarchs will use the orc hybrids as a temporary stage in making contact with a more suitable host population. Because it's not just the orc boy that becomes a hybrid, but the entire orcoid society or the orcoid chain, some gene stealer patriarchs use gene stealer squigs and gretchens to stow away inside of trading vessels, where these diminutive greenskin hybrids can then infect the ship's crew and eventually reconnect with the brood. Warbands of orcoid gene stealer hybrids like this are truly dangerous, but at the same time, they're a target to every single major faction in the galaxy when it's encountered. These abominations can seldom be reasoned with, and only orc war bosses with extremely low cunning will recruit them into their ranks. They also adopt this fanatical but primitive belief in the beast, which is really just the high fleet that they belong to. The beast figure replaces Gork and Mork, but because the orc mind has never been pious, the form of worship is almost always a caricature of what an orc hybrid thinks worship is. Examples of this is verbally praising the beast after the most simple actions. It's common for them to do this after burping or passing gas, because after all, orc hybrids are still orcs and they're disgusting beings. They will also sacrifice random items in the hopes of gaining the beast's favor. They will throw away their favorite shooter, only to realize it probably wasn't the best idea to give up their only weapon as an offering right before you're going to war. However, their main goal is always to reproduce, so if they cannot find more creatures to infect, the desperate orc hybrids will eventually seek out chaos, and they'll create gene stealer orc hybrids devoted to a chaos god. This is one of the rarest and probably the worst creatures in the entire galaxy. Now when it comes to their appearance, the standard orc gene stealer hybrid adopts a color variation that pertains to the high fleet where the gene stealers belong to. So green is still the major color, but undertones of like purple, pink, or blue are all over the hybrid. They also have enlarged craniums with webbed and protruding veins, chitinous-ridged foreheads, and large claw-like hands. And the banner of most of these orc hybrid warbands is some stylized version of this description as seen on this flag. Although rare, the strength and ferociousness of these orc gene stealer hybrids are not to be underestimated when encountered. Now let's take a break from these very unique faction combinations and explore what a Chaos Loyalist would look like. Not just basic Chaos Space Marines, but what would it look like if a hardcore Loyalist Space Marine chapter turned Chaos? Let's take a look at Salamanders. When it comes to the Salamander Space Marine chapter, it is renowned for how kind they are to a normal, everyday Imperial citizen. This chapter actually cares about the well-being of normal human beings, a trait not seen in any other Space Marine chapter. This uncharacteristically humble outlook on the safety of humanity, coupled with their devotion to the Emperor of Mankind, makes it very difficult to imagine an alternate universe in which the Salamanders chapter is a traitor legion instead of the devoted and protective loyalist chapter it is in the current era. However, that's not going to stop us from exploring the possibility of a Salamanders chapter that betrayed the Emperor of Mankind during the Horus Heresy and devoted themselves to the worship of chaos. Let's begin by taking a look at how a Chaos Salamander chapter would wage war against the Corpse Emperor and all of his brainwashed minions. Currently, the chapter is renowned for its expertise in the use of Melta and Flamer weapons. They have mastered the art of getting in close to the enemy and burning away swaths of troops and melting away any armored foe. A Chaos version of the Salamanders would be no different, but unlike the tactically efficient Loyalists, these traitors would use fire and ash to strike fear into the hearts of their enemies. The sounds of raging flames and the screaming, burned victims would echo through every battlefield marched upon by the Chaos Salamanders. Fire would become the Traitor Legion's calling card. Entire hive cities and manufactorums would become infernos of suffering as these pyromaniacs spread their violence across the galaxy. What would be interesting to see is the Salamander's utilization of warp flames. This could be through the use of sorcery or actual warp weapons, like the ones used by the Thousand Sons. These chaos-corrupted weapons would unleash gouts of transformic fire that mutates any being caught within its path. The enemy's skin would boil and their bones would bend as the warp flames twist their bodies until they can't take it anymore. This emphasis on burning their enemies to a crisp would strike terror in the minds of Imperial military forces and ignite a reputation of destruction for a Chaos Salamander chapter. Now, aside from the use of flamers and melta-weapons, Salamanders are also renowned for their ability to forge great relics and artificer items, a trait possessed not only by their Primarch, but also passed down by the culture of their homeworld of Nocturne. What I can see happening in a chaos-corrupted Salamander Legion is the forging of demons into their weapons. Under the guidance of the Chaos Gods, the masterful Tech Marines would dive into the forbidden lore of the Dark Mechanicus and gain the knowledge to trap the souls of chaos entities into their relics, much like the Hellforges found within the Immaterium today. Now let's be clear, no demon wants to be trapped in a lifeless object, and so these demonic weapons, forged by the corrupted Salamanders, would only be wielded by the most sadistic warriors of the Warband. A warrior capable of quenching the thirst for blood and slaughter that each demon weapon requires. Those that are not brutal enough to please the demon within would be betrayed by the weapon itself. Like all warp-touched items, these weapons would whisper words of corruption into the minds of each salamander, hoping to break their will and allow their bodies and souls to mutate into chaos spawn. Which brings us to the next very important topic to discuss, the mutating effects that would plague a chaos-corrupted Salamander Legion. Like all traitors, the bodies of the Salamanders would inevitably change due to the corruptive powers of the Chaos Gods, and we can get a good sense of what they would look like by taking a look at the rumored successor chapters of the Salamanders, the Black Dragons. You see, through a flaw in their gene seed, the Black Dragons develop protruding bone-like growths on their heads and forearms. This abnormality is more than likely also found within the Salamander's gene seed. Now, given the mutating effects of the warp, this strange gene seed flaw would run rampant all throughout the traitor Salamanders. Spikes would sprout from all limbs, and crowns of horns would jut out of their craniums. Their obsidian black skin would also harden, giving each traitor the appearance of a demonic statue more so than a living being. The fire-red eyes ubiquitous with the chapter would also burn brighter as the powers of the warp surged through their bodies. Now, the most shocking part would be the sheer size of these Chaos Salamanders, as they are already some of the largest Space Marines in the Imperium, but once empowered by the Chaos Gods, they would tower over every soldier created by the Emperor of Mankind. Now, as a mockery to the massive reptiles found on their homeworld of Nocturne, I would not be surprised if a few of these traitor marines develop reptilian features, such as tails, scaly skin, and serpent-like tongues. Others would succumb fully to their bestial mutations and become dragon-like entities. As far as their culture, the Chaos Salamanders would modify their beliefs, but still hold on to some twisted form of the Promethean cult. That means isolationism would still be practiced, believing that only through malevolent actions performed alone could a corrupted Space Marine truly get closer to a Chaos God. Their rituals would continue to be centered around flames, but would take on a more sadistic element, sacrificing their victims on a massive pyre or outright burning everything they can get their hands on. And instead of showing humility towards humanity, the Chaos Salamanders would enslave every human soul captured. Retinues of human slaves would follow each corrupted salamander, praising them as their loyalist counterparts praises the Emperor. Each slave would be branded with a mark of their master, a contrast to the ritual scarring that current-day salamanders undergo. These slaves would come from their homeworld of Nocturne, a volcanic world turned into a literal hell, where demonic entities swim in the lava pools and burning effigies of the Chaos Gods are venerated. Now, which Chaos God would be the patron god of the Traitor Salamander's chapter is not very difficult to assume. The chapter's affinity towards flames, coupled with its homeworld's lava aesthetic, makes you think of the realm of the blood god Khorne, whose domain is filled with literal fire pits and rivers of lava and blood. Now, the Salamander's affinity towards metalworks also calls the imagery of Khorne, the god of brass and steel. We could make the argument that a Chaos Salamanders chapter might be the first Traitor Legion to be devoted to the Forge of Souls, the most powerful Hellforge in the Warp, but even in temperament I feel like the God of Rage would be a better match, as Khorne's bloodlust is a sharp contrast to the patience and caring demeanor of a Loyalist Salamanders chapter. And what that means is that the ubiquitous green of the salamanders would have to change to some shade of red and black, perhaps a tone similar to the giant red salamanders of their homeworld of Nocturne, or some form of brass. Now, if you've been watching the deep dive videos for a while, this next lore is going to be kind of familiar to you. What would happen if the Necrons combined with Space Marines? The first thing that pops into my mind when I think of this awesome combination is, does it already exist? And the answer is not really, but kind of. You see, like most of the Imperium, Space Marine chapters are disgusted by xenotechnology. They have an extreme animosity towards anything that is not human tech, and obviously Necron technology is no exception. However, this hatred is steeped in the antiquated traditions forced onto most Space Marine chapters by factions like the Adeptus Mechanicus, which has a big influence on every single chapter, the Inquisition, which has kept a watchful eye on the autonomy of these Angels of Death, and the Ecclesiarchy, or the Imperial Church, which has manipulated their way into the culture of many of these Space Marine chapters. And although these influences have plagued the Space Marines for almost a full 10,000 years since the Great Crusade, there is one faction that does not shy away from using Xeno weapons and war gear, the Death Watch. Now, it's difficult to call the Death Watch a Space Marine chapter, as it's made up of a conglomeration of battle brothers from different chapters who are tasked with standing vigil over their domain, but these warriors are ubiquitous for wielding strange Xeno weapons into battle. So there is some form of precedence of Space Marines using Necron technology to fight for the Imperium. And there are two reasons why this is important. The first is that it proves that Space Marines are capable of physically using Necron technology. They might not understand the full capacity of this alien tech, but have the means to manipulate it to use it in their favor, a crucial step in establishing our Necron Space Marines. It also shows that they don't shy away from using xenotech, if not at least ignoring the established stigma or playing dumb. The second is that despite the disapproval of all of the other Imperial factions, the Death Watch is able to get away with using alien technology, meaning that a Necron Space Marine army would have to be tolerated if their duty or their charge was just as important as the Death Watch. Now we have to ask the question, why would a battle brother undergo hybridization with Necron technology? And the answer to that lies in the ideologies of one of the most famous Space Marine chapters, the Iron Hands. You see, the Iron Hands hold on to the belief that the flesh is weak. They view the improvements of the organic with the mechanical as something that should be sought after. They still respect the physical form and view their bodies as a blessing bestowed onto them by the Emperor of Mankind, but bionics are a way to enhance the godlike abilities of all battle brothers. And through these improvements, a battle brother is seen as becoming a stronger warrior because of the advantages provided by the machine. And there is no technology in the 40K universe more advanced than that of the Necrons. And so what if a successor chapter of the Iron Hands takes it upon themselves to improve their bodies not just with standard Imperial bionics, but Necron tech, using the materials found on their homeworld, which could have been an ancient Necron tomb world, whose reanimation protocols failed to kick in, and the tech marines of that chapter salvaged the Necron technology and incorporated it into each member of their chapter. Not only would that be an awesome origin story to this chapter, but it could open up a narrative storyline that the chapter must seek out and conquer new tomb worlds in order to maintain a steady source of tech for each generation of battle brothers. This Necron Space Marine chapter would in fact be Necron Grave Robbers. Now the question becomes, what type of enhancements would these Astarte warriors get if they incorporated Necron tech? Because let's be honest, we don't just want battle brothers that use Necron weapons, we want a complete fusion of the two factions. And the first obvious upgrade would be living metal armor. Not only would it make the already impervious Space Marines almost indestructible, but by using necrodermis on the bodies of Space Marines, their metal parts would be able to self-repair. And what's awesome about this concept is that the Primarch Ferrus Manus is rumored to have necrodermis arms, showing a connection between this successor chapter and their gene father. Now, incorporation of Necron technology would also mean the use of Noctilith, or Black Stone. This material is what made up the Necron pylons on Cadia and what is being heavily researched by the Adeptus Mechanicus in the current era. A Space Marine chapter with access to Black Stone would more than likely use it to defend itself against the powers of chaos, meaning that not only would a Necron Space Marine army be a major threat to other Tomb Worlds, but they would have a serious advantage over the armies of the Chaos Gods. This would make our homebrew chapter one of the most effective fighting forces in the Imperium against Xenos. Now, there could be some drawbacks to using Necron technology, as the new Necrodermis parts might alter the mindsets of individual battle brothers, taking away part of their free will and succumbing to some form of the command protocol. But this potential danger would just create an interesting backstory. For example, these Necron Space Marines must constantly be watched over by a tech priest to make sure that the ancient command protocols of the nanoscarabs that make up their bodies don't take over their minds. And just like the Wolfen Curse or the Black Rage, once a battle brother is taken over by the machine, his body must be destroyed so that his soul may return to the Emperor. In appearance, these Necron Space Marines would look more like battle automatons of the Adeptus Mechanicus than true Astarte warriors, but I don't see them changing too much of the human form given to them by the Emperor of Mankind. So, as badass as it would be to see Space Marine Wraith hybrids, I think most battle brothers would simply appear heavily modified with bionics rather than canoptic constructs. Their fortress monastery would more than likely be a stolen tomb world where the chapter master would sit and commune with his council in a chamber that once belonged to an ancient Necron overlord whose throne is now adorned with an imperial aquila. And then lastly, let's take a look at what the Tau Empire would look like if they combined with Space Marines.
The Tau Empire is seen as an enemy of the Imperium of Man, since their rapidly advancing culture was rediscovered on the eastern fringe of the Milky Way galaxy. Exactly when the Tau Empire and the Imperium of Man made first contact with one another is unknown, for each was slow to recognize the nature of the other. For the Tau's part, it was fringe, dissent, or overtly renegade elements of humanity that they first encountered, in the form of free captains and pirates, across the coreward borders of the region called the Damocles Gulf, in the eastern fringe to the galactic east of Terra. The initial contacts ranged from friendly negotiations and trade to outright hostility. It was some time before the Tau Watercast diplomats understood the fact that the humans they had encountered were merely the forgotten outcasts of an incomprehensibly vast interstellar empire that stretched across the entirety of the Milky Way galaxy. This empire was so vast that any overt aggression on the Tau's part might lead to the outright destruction of their new empire and the existence of their species. Though many of the more passionate leaders of the Tau Firecaste called for a war of conquest against the Imperium, the Ethereals issued their instructions for the integration of the Imperium of Man into the Tau Empire. The Watercasts were to ally themselves with nearby dissident human factions, and over the course of several decades of patient negotiations, insinuate themselves into the courts of several dozen Imperial commanders. The influence of the Tau thus spread further and more rapidly into the Imperium than any amount of military conquest could have taken it, until a swath of human worlds were trading with the Tau Empire in preference to the Imperium's own merchant trade cartels and rogue traders. Alien goods and technology flowed through the markets of these border worlds in plain contradiction of the laws of the Imperium. The second phase of the Ethereal's instructions were thus ready to be initiated. Upon a score of worlds, Watercast envoys whispered long-rehearsed words into willing ears. The seeds of rebellion had long been cultivated by the Tau, and now bore traitorous fruits, as each Imperial governor declared himself free of the shackles of the Imperium's rule. In the ensuing power vacuum, the Tau Empire expanded, claiming for themselves those human worlds that came to be known as the Farside Enclaves. The Imperium's response was unusually swift, but characteristically brutal. War was declared, and the Damocles Gulf Crusade was launched by the Ultima Segmentum Command, involving units of the Imperial Guard, the Imperial Navy, and several chapters of the Space Marines. But what if the Imperium would have never declared war on the Tau Empire? What if instead a new agreement between Terra and the Farside Enclaves were signed? an agreement that would allow the Imperial worlds to benefit from trade with the Tau, so long as the Tau Empire gave the worlds back and stopped their attempt to take control of Imperial worlds. As heretical as this may seem, the two empires would have benefited greatly from a treaty like this, because in the coming years, a new and much larger threat emerged in this part of space: Hive Fleet Gorgon. The Gorgon was a splinter fleet of the Hive Fleet Behemoth that had been found by those Tyranids who had survived the Behemoth's destruction during the Battle of Macragge, and which began consuming poorly defended Imperial worlds to replenish its small numbers. By the time this splinter fleet made its way into the Tau space in the eastern fringe of the galaxy, it had grown to become a full Hive Fleet in its own right. With the emergence of the Tyranids, the Imperium of Man and the Tau Empire would have been smart to form a pact of alliance. The Imperium would defend and trade with the Tau, and the Tau would fight and trade with the Imperium. This pact could have saved hundreds of planets from the Tyranid invasion, and even though it might seem as if an alliance would benefit the Tau more than the Imperium, the truth is, the Imperium of Man could see big benefits from the Tau Empire. The Tau Empire's caste system specializes its population to become masters of one trade. Tau diplomats could negotiate deals with neighboring planets on behalf of the Imperial Tau Alliance. Earth caste engineers could work alongside the Adeptus Mechanicus to demonstrate technology pioneered by the Tau Empire, such as plasma generators. The technologically savvy Tau Empire could lead the AdMech to further understanding of the Omnissiah and his place within the technology. But most importantly, the Tau Fire Warrior caste would prove to be the most beneficial part of a Tau Imperial alliance. The Tau are unique amongst the Xeno species of the galaxy, in that they possess no psychers, nor do they succumb to the chaotic taint like an Imperial guardsman. Tau Fire Warriors would be the perfect auxiliary in an ever-growing battle against the forces of chaos. While they do not possess the pariah gene, nor are they able to nullify the warp, the Tau Fire Warrior can enter a war zone and fight the demons of chaos without fear of coming out of the battles contaminated. At first, the Imperium of Man would use the Tau Fire Warriors as a complement to the Imperial Guard, but after seeing the Fire Warriors' inability to fight wars of attrition, they would shift their military force into a special operation force. Tau's tendency towards diplomacy and trade would allow the Fire Warriors to be purchased as mercenaries. It would be to the Tau's advantage to allow their fire caste to fight in the name of the Imperium in order to keep the Imperium from fighting the Tau. At the same time, the Tau Fire Warriors would be gathering intel on the strategies of the Imperium of Man. The mercenary Fire Warrior would build on to the stockpile of reconnaissance the Tau would need in future conflicts. The tech priest and magobiologist of the Adeptus Mechanicus could not resist dissecting and enhancing the biology of the Tau Fire Warriors, and it would be in the best interest of the Tau Ethereal caste to allow this to occur. Augmentation to the Tau physiology would lead the Tau to better understanding the medical processes of the Imperium. Their goal would be to understand their genetic manipulation abilities. The endgame would be the creation of Tau Space Marines. The gene seed of a Space Marine can never be used to enhance a Tau Fire Warrior. The gene seed would simply not match any of the Tau's natural physiologies. What the Tau would have to do is understand how the gene seed was manipulated and how it can be replicated to fit the Tau Fire Warrior's genome. Because the gene seed of a Space Marine comes from his Primarch, and that Primarch's gene seed comes from the God Emperor himself, the Tau Empire would have to face the fact that their Tau Space Marines would never be a true Space Marine, but the skills and abilities of an Astartes would be replicated and enhanced. Once the Earth caste discovered the genetic manipulation power of the Imperium, it would begin to augment and enhance their Fire Warrior caste, a secret project that would begin on the Tau's homeworld that would see the birth of the Tau Space Marines. These new Fire Warriors would have multiple organs that would manipulate and enhance the Tau's natural respiratory and nervous system, allowing them to perform great feats of endurance better than a Space Marine. They would contain augmentations to the unique Tau gland that would improve the warrior's endocrine system, creating massive Tau fire warriors. They would be larger and stronger than the fire warriors of the past, and stronger than even a space marine. Augmentation to the Tau's immune system would create fire warriors, impervious to disease and illness. Their ability to heal from wounds that would normally kill a normal warrior would make them appear indestructible. Like the space marines of the Imperium, they would no longer need sleep like a normal Tau. Their bodies would be able to shut off sections of their brain and remain alert enough to continue fighting. The Tau's natural connection to the ethereal cast would be enhanced, to the point where a Tau space marine would be able to intrinsically coordinate attacks without having to stay in constant communication with the ethereal commander. Hormonal signals would direct each Tau space marine, allowing each member of the team to know whom to attack and how best to battle a foe. This new enhancement would seem to be derived from some telepathic power, but in reality, it would be similar to the way ants on Terra communicate with each other. They send pheromonal markers that direct the whole colony. Tau Space Marine vision would improve to the point where sights would be irrelevant to a fire warrior. Their superior eyesight, coupled with Tau technology like target lock, would make the new Tau warrior the deadliest marksmen in the galaxy. The last and one of the most important of the gene seed organ implants a Tau Space Marine would possess is the Black Hoof. A neuroactive black organic fibrous material is implanted directly on top of the Tau Fire Warrior's hooves, which would connect to the Tau's central nervous system. The black hooves would be as strong as Space Marine adamantium, incapable of feeding back information to the Tau's brain about the environment. In addition, the hooves would be able to decipher the biological makeup of anything they step on. Tau Space Marine would become notorious for stomping the heads of their enemies, because by doing so, the Tau Marine absorbs the enemy's knowledge.
And those are the coolest hybrids that I've thought about so far. If you guys have another awesome combination, please let me know in the comment section below and I'll try to create a video for you guys. I hope you guys are enjoying these deep dive videos. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down in the comment section below, whatever you want. It really helps out the channel. Share this with your friends on Facebook, Reddit, whatever social media you guys use. And thank you guys so much for watching. We'll talk tomorrow. This is Gersh1 with One Mind Syndicate signing out.
Always used to put my freedom first in any situation.